Hello, I'm Johnny, and today's topic is no more load management. Should one play at least 65 games to compete for annual awards?
No vest.
A couple of days ago, the league announced a series of new rules and competition formats, including a tournament during the regular season, drug tests that exclude marijuana, the All-NBA teams no longer being position-based, and a minimum of 65 games played to be eligible for annual awards. Additionally, two-way contract slots per team will be increased from 2 to 3, and teams over $17.5 million in luxury tax will no longer have access to the mid-level exception, among other things. Honestly, there are many adjustments, but today let's focus on the 65-game limit. We will discuss other topics in the future. Before we dive in, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support is our greatest motivation. Thank you. I must be honest, setting a 65-game requirement for players to compete for annual awards is a strong measure, but I personally support it. Why do I say it's strong? If we follow this rule, for players from last season's All-NBA teams, including KD, 55, LeBron James, 56, Ja Morant, 57, and Stephen Curry, 64, would not have been eligible. However, the strength of the measure is one thing, its reasonableness is what matters. In my opinion, it's very reasonable. Around 2000 or earlier, players playing games was a given, and many played over 75 or even 80 games. John Stockton, the all-time assists leader, is a great example, as playing a full season was no big deal for him. Because of this, legends like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and new generation stars like Anthony Edwards all publicly opposed load management. Their reasoning was that fans save up money to buy tickets to watch games, and it's unfair if the stars don't play. However, in this championship-focused era with players earning over $30 million annually, teams care more about title chances and player health than fan sentiment. As a result, teams gradually accepted the notion that the regular season doesn't matter as long as they win championships in the playoffs. To strike a balance, the league encouraged stars to play more games while not affecting load management. They finally reached an agreement with the Players Association that players must appear in at least 65 games to compete for annual awards. Fans might wonder how the 65-game limit was set and if it's too high. Let's look at the data. In the 80s and early 90s, the MVP with the fewest games played was Magic Johnson in the 1988-89 season, with 77 games. In the 90s, the MVP with the fewest games played was Karl Malone in the 1998-99 season, with 49 games. However, don't be mistaken, the NBA had a lockout that season, so there were only 50 regular season games. In other words, Malone missed just one game. In the 2000s, the MVP with the fewest games played was Steve Nash in the 2004-2005 season, with 75 games and an attendance rate of 88%. In the 2011-12 season, another lockout shortened the regular season to 66 games. LeBron James won the MVP, playing 62 games with an attendance rate over 90%. However, starting from the 2017-18 season, the MVP's games played noticeably decreased. The 2019-20 and 2020-21 seasons were affected by the pandemic, resulting in less than 75 regular season games. Also, many players couldn't play due to health and safety protocols, so we won't discuss those two seasons. In the 2017-18 season, the MVP was Harden, who played 72 games with an attendance rate of 87%. In the 2018-19 season, the Greek Freak also had an attendance rate of 87%. As for the MVP of the last season, Nikola Jokic, he played 74 games with an attendance rate of 90%. In fact, Jokic played only 72 games in the 2020-21 season, but he had full attendance because there were only 72 regular season games that season. The NBA regular season consists of 82 games, and the current rule of 65 games means that a player's attendance rate should be around 80%. After reviewing these examples, we return to the original question, is the 65-game standard difficult to achieve? My personal opinion is that it's not difficult. Even though the number of games played by MVPs in recent seasons has decreased significantly compared to the past, both Harden and the Greek Freak still had attendance rates of 87%. Here, we also provide the opinion of DDR from the Bulls. In a media interview in February, he stated that a player must play at least 78 games to compete for the annual MVP. Honestly, I think this number is too high, even for players from the past. So, when I saw the league setting the 65-game rule, I thought it wouldn't be difficult to achieve. Compared to the 80s and 90s when players often received full attendance awards, the 65-game limit already provides players with room for rest. In reality, an attendance rate of 80% means that a player can rest in 2 out of 10 games, which should be sufficient from the perspective of rest. To some extent, this adjustment strikes a balance. However, it's undeniable that not everyone can accept the new rule, just like the play-in games. Many people criticize the establishment of the play-in games, but at this stage, it seems that the new format is very successful, or at least, quite exciting. Next, we'll discuss why there is a 65-game limit. Simply put, it provides a standard for fans and the media to evaluate players. The 65-game limit serves as an evaluation standard for fans and the media. Taking LeBron James as an example, we won't discuss the 2020-21 season due to the pandemic, which caused the league to start in December with only 72 regular season games. In the 2021-22 season, the Lakers didn't make it to the playoffs, and LBJ, who played only 56 games that season, was still selected for the All-NBA third team. Personally, I disagreed with his selection. Why? Because the NBA rules state that a player must play more than 70% of the games for their individual stats to be included in the rankings. So, in the previous season, we didn't see LBJ's name in the scoring and assists rankings. In simpler terms, if a player's individual stats can't even make it to the rankings, how can they be selected for the All-NBA team? Honestly, I think this is a strange phenomenon. After all, making the All-NBA team is a great honor, but the evaluation standard is lower than the rankings? This is really odd. It can even be said that it's unfair to other hardworking players. In fact, fans didn't see the stats of Ja Morant and Kevin Durant, KD either, right? Because both players didn't play the 58 games, which is 70% of the regular season games. However, both the Grizzlies and the Nets made it to the playoffs, which is why I personally opposed LBJ's. Why do I specifically mention this example? As mentioned earlier, the 65-game requirement is intended to provide fans and media with a grading standard. In other words, starting from next season, when we evaluate whether a player is eligible for annual awards, there will be a basic grading standard. Otherwise, if a player can be selected with 56 games, fans will definitely question why other players with 54 games aren't eligible, right? Personally, I think setting a basic grading standard is not a problem. Alright, the above is about whether the 65-game requirement is reasonable and difficult to achieve. Next, we will discuss another aspect of the issue. Will players take more rest days like before, or will they play more games? My personal view is that they will play more games, as this will affect their contracts. For example, players signing designated rookie contracts can trigger the so-called Rose Rule and increase their salary from 25% to 30% of the salary cap if they win individual awards. These awards include All-NBA First Team, MVP, and Defensive Player of the Year. The Hawks' Trae Young and the Mavericks' Luka Doncic have both been selected for the All-NBA First Team, so their contracts account for 30% of the salary cap. As for the Celtics' Jason Tatum, although he has a good chance this season, he hasn't been selected for the All-NBA First Team in previous seasons, so his contract only accounts for 25% of the salary cap. In addition, if a player wants to get a maximum contract accounting for 35% of the team's salary cap, such as a designated veteran, they must also have individual awards. In reality, the three main goals that players chase in the NBA are championships, big contracts, and individual awards. The 65-game requirement already affects two of these aspects, making it a strong measure. Lastly, let's talk about mentality. If a player isn't limited by the number of games they should play, they would naturally rest whenever they can. However, once there's a restriction on the number of games, I believe players will adjust their mindset. In fact, current rest days don't necessarily mean that players are injured. Often, they are given rest to prevent injuries. But with the new regulation, players must consider more than just winning championships. After all, if they want to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, individual awards are essential, right? Not to mention the contract aspect. So, in the future, fans should be able to tell whether a player is unable to play due to injury or simply doesn't want to play. This can actually be observed. In the end, let's look at the poll. A total of 19,000 people participated, and I would like to thank these netizens for their participation. Over 70% of the respondents believe that the 65-game requirement is reasonable. This poll is also provided for your reference. In reality, any competition format and regulations are difficult to perfect. For example, the All-NBA team not being position-based has its pros and cons. However, I personally think that the 65-game requirement, or the 80% attendance rate, is already a middle ground. Any higher would be difficult to achieve. 90% is really too tough, right? If the attendance rate is lowered to only 70%, it would be unfair to other hardworking players. So, once this regulation is in place, both fans and players must learn to adapt to it. Regardless of whether it's James Harden, Giannis Antetokounmpo, or Nikola Jokic, none of them have played more than 75 games in a season. In the 2019-2020 season, Antetokounmpo only played 63 games. However, due to the pandemic that year, each team only played around 72 to 73 games. Taking Antetokounmpo's Milwaukee Bucks as an example, they played 73 regular season games. This translates to an attendance rate of 84% for Antetokounmpo. However, fans should not forget that many players were suspended by the league due to health and safety protocols at the time. Therefore, judging Antetokounmpo based on 62 games is unfair.